The wind curled off the wall as if it were a living thing, sly and thin and eager to put its cold teeth between cloth and skin. It crept beneath John's collar and bit the back of his neck while he watched the boys in the yard. They were at it again. 3 rough lads from the mountain clans hammering at a shy boy with a shield too big for him and a face he tried to make smaller by holding it down. Wooden swords cracked like distant lightning. The breath from their mouths ghosted in the air. "Raise your shield," Sir Alistair barked, bored and sharp, his black cloak snapping in the wind. "If you mean to live long enough to run, you might as well learn it right." Samwell Tarley flinched at the command, and his shield tilted rather than rose. The blow that followed rattled him down to his knees. The other boys laughed, quick, ugly, and furtive, each glance flicking to the master-at-arms as if laughter itself were a trespass here. John did not laugh. He remembered the first day he'd seen Sam, soft-faced and sweating even in the cold. He'd recognized the particular stiffness of the shoulders, the brace for the next hurt. John had learned the same posture in Winterfell's yard. Sir Roderick had once told him it was a poor guard if you meant to keep your feet. If you meant not to cry, though, it worked well enough. The mountain boys pressed, not cruel so much as hungry. They felt the yard was meat and the master's eye their teeth. It was the way of the wall to turn even boys into wolves for a little while. Sam fumbled. The heavy shield dipped in the slush, and the whack of wood on would made a quick, sick sound. John's hand tightened on the railing. "Enough," Sir Alistair said flatly. "Tarley, you will hold your shield. Watch." He stepped close, movements clipped, showing the angle, bracing his own arm with his shoulder. "You are not carrying your father's table. You are carrying your only friend." Sam nodded as if he had been told a prayer. He tried again. He would try until his arms shook and his breath hitched with pain. Then he would drop the shield and abase himself with apologies, and the boys would laugh again because no one knew what else to do. John left the railing. There were mercies to be made, and they were not always pretty. He crossed the yard, his boots crisp on frost, and stopped in the little wedge of space beyond Sam's shoulder. "Gren," he said to one of the mountain boys. "My turn." Gren squinted at him, then passed his sword with a shrug, glad enough to stand and watch. The cold found its way beneath John's gloves. The wood was slick where some boy's sweat had left it. John could still taste the iron of Winterfell's forges if he tried, but out here the smell of old ash and pine pitch was a sourer thing, mingled with the rank tang of wet wool. Sam looked up through his lashes like a rabbit peering over a hedge. Shame burned on his cheeks. "Ready?" John asked, as if this were the only thing they had met here to do. Sam nodded and held the shield again, more carefully now. John lifted the sword in a lazy arc, not hard, not fast, letting Sam catch it on the wood. He stepped and swung, showing the pattern Sir Alistair had shown, and guided Sam's body with the rhythm of his own blows. Sam missed one and caught the next. The boys began to jeer, then fell quiet as the sound of wood on wood took on a steadier measure. After a time, Sir Alistair drifted off to berate someone else. It was strange how the yard grew emptier when no one was watching. John lowered his sword. "There," he said. "You see." Sam swallowed. "My arm shakes." "It does," John agreed, and pretended it were a jest. "Perhaps there's a maester's trick to stop it." "Is there a trick for that?" Sam made a small noise that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough. "There's willow bark for pain, or willow bark for fever, or for making you wish you had a different tongue." "I'd take that one," John said. "I don't like mine much. It keeps saying things I didn't think." He watched Sam's mouth twist in confusion, then flatten into the shy smile that came so rarely. "Walk with me," John added. The cold lay clean on the air, and the light was running pale. Night would fall fast. Sam followed, clutching the shield as if ashamed to leave it lying. They crossed from the yard into the stony, windowless warren that was the watch's heart, and the smell of smoke closed around them like a blanket. "I spoke with Lord Commander Mormont," John said as they descended the tight, spiraling stair to Maester Aemon's chambers. "About you." Sam blanched so fast that the color seemed to drain from his lips to his collar. "The Lord Commander?" "Don't faint," John said, more gently than the words sounded. "It's not a flogging. I told him you're no use in the yard and less on arranging, but that you are a better steward of words than any of us. He asked me if I was calling you a coward. I said I was calling you a kind of sword we keep dropping."
Sam blinked.
"A sword. One not meant for chopping," John said. "For opening." The stair emptied into warmth and the faint perfume of herbs and parchment. Maester Eamon's chamber was a modest kingdom of order. Shelves upon shelves of scrolls and bound books, a brazier banked under pumice to keep an old man's blood moving, 3 lamps in carefully trimmed oil. Eamon sat near the brazier, head bent, hands folded around nothing. "Eamon," John said softly. He called him by name when they were alone. It was something the old man permitted John and no one else, perhaps because John did it as if the syllables were precious. "Come," Eamon said without turning his head. His blind eyes were glad all the same. "Is the wind a friend today? I cannot hear it, so it must be sulking." "It's jealous," John said. "Because we have Sam." Sam started again. "Maester," he murmured, reverence making his voice smaller. "It is Samwell?" Eamon asked and held out a hand. Sam knelt, foolish but earnest, and took the old man's. Fingers in both of his. John watched the gratitude pass between them like a spark carried cupped in palms. He felt that spark whenever he brought a stray pup to a warm hearth. He tried not to feel it about men, but there it was. "Eamon," John said, "I asked Mormont to send Sam to the Citadel." Silence, save for the brazier's faint, contented hiss. Sam's grip faltered. "No," he breathed. "No, please, I swore my—" "You swore your life to the wall," John said. "Your life is more than your sword arm. The Citadel will still give what you learned to the Watch. We keep maesters because our needs are not a single thing. I told the Lord Commander that you'd serve us better in Oldtown than you would in frost up to your knees, making us dig you out." Sam swallowed. His eyes shone and seemed to tremble in his face. They would take me? Not for nothing," Eamon said, voice thin as snow but precise as the edge of a razor. "The Citadel asks for coin or a name. A sponsor must say you have leave to study, that your ilk is not so valuable where you are that we cannot afford to lose you. We have neither coin nor any name that turns the Citadel's head." "We have mine," John said. Eamon faced him then, sightless and tender and terrible in his compassion. "A bastard's name," he said. "It is the only one I have," John answered. "I wrote to Winterfell. Father will not refuse me when I say it is for the Watch. He will lend the coin, and Lord Commander Mormont will sign the letter that says Sam is ours to give." Sam tried to speak, then shut his mouth on the words and shook his head. The slow tears that came from him were not thick with self-pity this time, but thin with relief so large it frightened him. "I will fail," he whispered. "I will fail." "You will fail and fail until you learn," Eamon said. He smiled. "It is the way with any hard work. The difference is only whether you love the work enough to keep failing." His hand tightened in Sam's as far as it could. "You love learning, Samwell. It is no small love in a world like ours." John watched the small, clumsy transformations of the face that had been taught to dread its own needs. The Watch had given John discipline and duty. Sometimes it gave men to themselves. "You cannot go tomorrow," John said. "But soon. I mean it to be soon." Sam nodded, then nodded again as if nodding could be a kind of proof. "I thank you," he managed, useless words for a thing that would remake his days. John clasped his shoulder anyway, as if gratitude might be steadied by a hand's weight. The raven on the perch near Eamon's shoulder ruffled and muttered, "Soon, soon," in a voice like pebbles knocked together. "Even his bird agrees," Eamon said. "Who am I to gainsay him?" John laughed then, and the cold that had crept into his bones shook free like dust. A fortnight later, a small party rode from Castle Black under a sky hard as hammered tin. The road was a pale scratch across darker snow. Sam turned in the saddle more than once, looking back at the wall as if disobedient to some command. He had the look of a man leaving a thing unfinished, though what man ever finished a wall? "Keep your quill warm," John said. One gloved fist on Sam's stirrup leather, while the others checked girths and stirrups. "Write us of everything you see. Write as if the seeing is more important than the naming." Sam nodded, cheeks grooved with recent cold and old fear. "There's an archmaester who wears a ring and mask of Valyrian steel," he babbled, grasping at talk to stop the danger of tears. "He studies magic. The other maesters think he's a bit mad. I think I might like him better than the rest." "Then like him," John said, mouth corking, "and like the ones you do not. All knives cut if they are sharp." Donal Noy, the smith, handed Sam a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. "For luck," he said, his one arm awkward and more tender for it. "Open it on the ship. If you open it here, I'll see your face and it'll make me worry." Sam tucked the parcel inside his cloak where it would keep his belly warm. He did not dare to look at John as he turned to go. The big gelding shifted under him as if eager to be done with sentiments. Sam lifted his hand. John found his own hand lifting to match it. The gesture made them both grin, and both ashamed of the grin, boy and boy again in that instant just before men are made of them. When the figures on horseback dwindled to pricks of black on the white waste, the wind took up its whispering. John stared at the wall until his eyes watered, then went to find Donal Noy. "What did you give him?" John asked when they were back among the furnaces, the heat on their shins and faces, a biting of smoke the lungs learned to like. "Something I like to give a man when he must feel brave," Donal said. He laid fresh charcoal, slid a half-wrought spearhead deeper into orange. The metal's glow reminded John of fat banked at the heart of a fire. The heat smelled sweet as honey burned black. "The courage to be a fool is not nothing. He has it in plenty." "What was it?" John persisted. Noy grunted, then smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. "A knife," he said. "Not metal. Glass. There's a mason I know keeps a little black glass from a time a trader came north smelling like the sea. He couldn't cut stone with it. You can cut different things." John touched the table where Noy laid finished tools for cooling and saw, under a rag, the dark gleam of oil. He felt that same strange spark Eamon's chamber had known, a small, determined light. South of the wall, the rolling truth of the north made short work of men who thought winter a story. They moved hard through the snow that lay like flour spilt upon slate, then harder through thin rains that turned the roads to mud up to the ankles of horses and the calves of men on foot. Sam learned slowly to keep his layers dry as a dragon hoards gold and to sleep in his cloak without having it choke him in the night. He learned to write, with his gloves off and his fingers failed him, and he learned how to thaw them by holding them under his arms until they were not his anymore. He breathed steam like some ridiculous kettle and woke with his hair frozen along his brow in fine, glassy lines. At Oldtown, the low warren of cellars smelled of damp and onions, always onions. The wildlings who had taken wives there eyed Sam with a steady, measuring scorn he recognized as the same ration of respect they gave each other. He ate stew and watched the steam on his spoon as if it could teach him something. The caravan he had attached himself to pushed southward. At the King's Road, the world widened and softened, and the trees were less like bone and more like flesh. In White Harbor, he saw the sea for the first time. He stood at the edge of the docks with the salt slicking his lips and the gulls crying with that ruined, indecent sound as if they had their bellies open. The masts made a forest of different rules, and the water under the pilings moved like muscle. Everything was too large. He had thought the wall large, but that had the innocence of stone. This bigness was ripples and sighing and weight you could not quite count. A crewman with silver rings in his ears took their coins and their small fates. Sam lurched aboard in the wake of the other passengers and found himself clutching the parcel Donal Noy had given him as if it were a saint's bone. The ship was called the Dowager because it was fat and stately and creaked as if sitting down or standing up required an acknowledgement of some old injury. For days later, with the north gone to a smudged line and his supper twice fed to the sea, Sam opened the parcel under the cuddy's low lantern. The black glass lay in his palm like a drop of night torn loose. He had seen obsidian once in a book. The book's illustration had tried to make it seem smooth, but this had edges even where it curved. A knife, as Donal had said. The hilt was bound in something like rawhide, though not so coarse. It had a primitive sureness to it that made Sam think of old songs. Along the blade, trapped in the glossy dark, were faint swirls like frozen smoke. He tested the edge against his thumb and hissed when it bit him without any pressure he'd meant to give. He wrapped it back at once, pressing the little cut against his coat to stop the bleed. The island of blood it made looked bright and ridiculous and made him feel as if he were a character in a story, which was another wrongness he regarded with fascination. He kept the knife near at hand for the rest of the voyage, a foolishness he dignified in his own mind with the name of caution. Oldtown came up out of the sea haze slowly, and then all at once, its walls a pale smear, its towers crowded as the teeth in an old man's mouth. And there in the west, dominating its own horizon, was the high tower, rising like a cubit marker toward whatever gods kept their eyes on the southern edge of the world. The beacon fire burned by day in a ghostly way, more smoke than flame, and by night it would be a new star that smelled of whale oil and ambition. Sam disembarked with the painful care of a man who has earned every bruise and does not want to be paid again. The air smelled of tar and salt and fish guts and something sweet he could not name. He felt as ridiculous as a country girl, staring at everything. He had a letter with Lord Commander Mormont's seal and another with the seal of a direwolf, which he did not dare regard closely for fear some guard would decide wolf seals were treason now. The Citadel's gates were panels of wood hard as iron, banded with metal, desired by no one but respected by all. The porters gave him that same careful disdain as Oldtown had. He did not know whether to take comfort in the sameness of contempt. Pate, a novice with a freckled nose and an expression of visible relief at being someone else's guide, came to take him in. "Your name?" "Samwell Tarley," Sam said, trying to make the syllables look like they belonged to a person with a purpose. "Southern?" Pate asked, pen already blotted. "Do you want your letters read for you, or will you do it yourself?" "I'll do it," Sam said, and added, because fear sometimes hurried him into honesty, "I read very fast." Pate paused and gave him a look like a child presented with a new sweet that might be medicine. "Archmaester Ibrose likes that." "I'm to study under him?" Sam asked. He knew better than to hope and did it anyway. "Under all of them, in time," Pate said, the road of it bored into him. "Under none of them, in time, if you bother the wrong ones." He smiled then, conspiratorial and rueful. "Don't use the wrong oil on the wrong leather and you'll keep your hide." "I wouldn't know which were wrong," Sam confessed. "You will," Pate said, and hustled him along through courts where the sound of ravens came as a single impossible noise made of thousands of separate noises, and through rooms where the smell of vellum was like the breath of warm bread. Sam kept his hands to himself. Archmaester Ibrose was a kinnear of a man, a stringed instrument in human form, thin, precise, quick to quiver and slow to forgive it. He read Mormont's letter with small, squeezing motions of his lips and nodded only once. "So you are a Night's Watch steward?" "Yes," Sam said. I am. "You will be again," Ibrose corrected. "If you do not waste the donor's money and your time. You are permitted both so rarely in this world that a man must be greedy for them." He wrote something in a book carefully, as if its carefulness could correct careless lives. "Why are you here, Samwell Tarley?" "Because I will be more use here," Sam said, and the words felt like a stone he had carried far enough to understand its weight. "Everything I learn I will send north. We need to know the old things and which of them are lies." Ibrose's mouth did the interesting thing, a smile that immediately discipled itself into a straight line. "You could have said that you love books, and I would have believed you, but this will do. Mind you this at least, books are not always kind. Open the wrong one at the wrong time and it will devour the next 10 years of your life." Sam thought of the wall, of how large it was, of how small one man's life looked held up against it. It seems a reasonable bargain. If Ibrose liked him, he did not show it. If he despised him, he did not show that either. He turned and handed Sam off with academic indifference to the next chain in the human machine. Sam learned the rules as men learn cold, which simply means he learned what it felt like to ignore them and pay. He found no kindness until he found all eras in the practice yard. All eras was dark and fine-boned and loosed arrows with a carelessness that was all artifice. You could tell because none of them missed. She taught the other novices how to hold their breath and how to let it go. She watched Sam watch her and said, "You hate the yard, but you like the way the arrows go where they are meant to go." He flinched and nodded, guilty of admiration. "Come," she said. "If you have a fear, you must borrow mine. I am not using it all, and it will feel odd in your hands and teach your hands that they can feel more than fear." He was not good with a bow. He was not good with a sling or a spear. He was good with counting how many times he failed before he struck anything and writing the number down and making it smaller. All eras told him in a tone that made the words less cruel that this, too, was a kind of aim. He read until his eyes burned, and they gave him a little pot of salve and a little blindfold and told him to rest them. He made lists of things he wanted to learn. He learned the names of extinct kings whose bones had been ground for poultices. He learned that salt keeps some things and ruins others, and that no one has yet made a salt that keeps the world safe. He learned that there are fires a man can blend in the dark and fires that belong to dragons. The first time he went to the ravenry, his heart tripped like a frightened horse. The ravens looked back with eyes like polished stops. They knew their letters and none of their love for men. He loved them anyway. He wrote a letter to John every third night and worried that the worrying would carry through the ink like a scent to a wolf. He wrote what he learned and what he wanted to learn and what he had failed at learning. John's replies came less frequently and meant more than any money. He kept them under his pillow until he thought he was a boy again. Sam found a book in a locked shelf. The key he borrowed from a man too tired to say no, which is what the Citadel says to a certain eagerness. The book was a miscellany of old northern lays, recorded by a woman who had likely lied about her sex to be allowed to tell the truth in ink. In its gutter, in a crabbed hand margin walking like a thief, someone had written, "Obsidian, obsidian, obsidian." The glosses were not as interesting as the repetition. They were notes. It breaks, it shatters, it cuts. Sam wrote the word on a scrap and carried it like a charm. When all ears saw it peeping from a cuff, she asked, "What do you want to cut? The cold?" Sam said, then flushed at how foolish that sounded. "Then strike something that sings because it, too, is brittle," she said. And the next afternoon she took him to the river mouth where glass-smooth stones lay like eggs and broke one open for him. Inside was nothing but stone. He took that emptiness as instruction and returned to his lists. Marwyn found him near the library's furnace 2 months later. The Archmaester wore his ring and rod and mask when it pleased him. Today he wore none of them but the ring and looked less like an academic monster and more like a man whose scars had been earned rather than learned. His hands were blunt. His eyes would not look kindly on a liar. "You're the one from the wall," Marwyn said. "What lies have they told you about me? That you are the sort of man who keeps fires lit out of stubbornness," Sam said, then wished he had bitten his tongue. He knew he had forgotten to be careful. Marwyn laughed as if at a joke God himself had told poorly. "You've read Barth and come away with a love for failing often enough to make failures useful. Good. The others fear that about him more than they fear dragons. Come at midnight to the top of the Green Tower." Sam had never been to the top of any tower at midnight for anything other than needing to vomit. He went anyway because you could not say no to a man who smelled like ship's tar and libraries. The stairs were mean, the stones worn, the air in them older than any king and more patient. When he reached the top, he thought he would cough up his heart and began to rehearse apologies to offer for having died where he had been told to meet a man. Marwyn was there, of course. Some men arrived places as if they had been born there, without any of the muss of travel. The room was small and windowed without glass, and the wind was a thin blade. He had a bundle on the table that turned out to be as little as it looked, an unadorned candle of a stone not meant to be a candle. Black glass again, but not like the knife. This had a slow sheen in it and was tall as Sam's forearm. It did not look like any candle should look, which is the way with things that have not forgotten other shapes. Marwyn struck in a tinderbox. "This will be foolishness," he said. "It will be folly. We will do it anyway to insult the times." Sam said nothing. The flint sparked. The wick, if you could call it that, caught no flame. never caught. The room seemed to fill with a waiting that was not the room's or theirs. Sometimes, Marwyn said, the trick to fire is that you must be near another fire. When the girl across the sea hatched her 3, I lit the other. I have not snuffed it since. Teaches me how stubborn stone is. It teaches me what listens when there is no one to hear. He lifted his gaze from the hard black. I asked you here because you are a coward who persists. That is rarer than bravery and twice as useful. Will you swear to keep silent about what you see? Sam thought of vows and how each one wanted the other's throat. I will swear to tell it only to the watch, he said, and only what you permit. Good, Marwyn said, and pricked his own thumb with something that had hidden in his palm. He let a drop of blood fall on the slick surface of the candle. It was theatrical. It was vulgar. It worked. No flame bloomed because this was not a world where fire required flame. Instead, a slow, cold light rose inside the stone like winter dawn through black ice. The tower seemed to become a throat. Sam felt his breath fail him and found it again across the room, on the other side of the table, as if it had needed to go around. The open windows admitted the night, and the night admitted other things. Look, Marwyn said, and his voice was easy and tired, as if a man might look from one dusk to another as a matter of course. Sam looked. He saw snow and the shape the snow makes when men walk through it and when things that used to be men walk through it. The scene had the quality of glass and of water both. If he moved, the image slid with him, slight and compliant. As he breathed, it trembled. He saw men on a wall of ice. He understood what he was seeing and nearly wept for the simplicity of understanding it. But he refused tears because he was letting them come too often these days for joy and for fear and for the little astonishments that teaching affords, and some joys were a kind of privacy. Think on the one you wish, Marwyn instructed, no ceremony in it. Do not grip after him. Think on him as he might be thinking on himself. Sam did not dare to make the mistake of wanting. He thought of John standing at a parapet, breathing the particular cold of the wall as if it had species. He thought of John with his hand on a railing, head bent, speaking soft to a man hurt in the yard and then scolding him for not understanding something that should be obvious. He thought of John's mouth when it twitched with reluctant humor. The black glass brightened in a way that had nothing to do with light. Good, Marwyn murmured. He could as easily have said good to a child building a toy boat whose sails would never catch a wind. Now speak. John, Sam said. His voice sounded like itself and not like it. The sound went into the stone and did not come out. On the other end of the world, halfway between sleep and duty and the hurt that is simply a day's labor, John turned his head. The wind pulled at him. He felt he could not name what he felt. Then a voice came out of the dark as if it had traveled underground and obeyed all the polite rules of roots. John, it said, and it was Sam, and it was not the way ravens say names or the way men do in letters' flatness. It was a voice with a pulse. John did not shout. He did not lunge. He had learned the fool's leap well and learned when not to leap. He stepped into the lee of a merlin, the wall's whole side a shoulder to lean against. Sam? He asked, knowing it was and knowing this was a folly he could step off of and fall. Don't be afraid, the voice said, and made John laugh once. A single white puff in the cold. I'm with a man who thinks I'm afraid of everything. I know where you are, John said. Tell me something only you know. Donal Noy gave me a glass knife, Sam blurted. I cut myself on it. I put my blood on a ship. I thought it meant something. Doesn't. Or if it does, I haven't learned the alphabet yet. John did not answer for a measured beat. When he did, his voice was even. It means you will cut something that isn't you. After, when the candle dimmed and went back to being a piece of obsidian in a room with too much wind, Marwyn sat and drank from a little flask he had brought. He offered it to Sam. Sam sipped. It was vile and it warmed him like a quarrel. You'll do, Marwyn said. For what? For bringing back old things, Marwyn said, as if he were not speaking of objects. For tearing off barnacles and seeing what is underneath. For trusting nonsense until it turns sense. You need to read of obsidian. You need to read every mention of dragonglass in the Northmen's songs. You need to learn why those old savages put black glass in wood. Come to me when you think you know. We will then set fire to the next layer of ignorance. Sam left with the weight of a task and the strange buoyancy of having found the place where his fear was an instrument and not a chain. He began to read not in lines but in threads, following the faint glimmer of obsidian through texts that had been copied by men with rats in their sleeves. He coveted the word as if it were coin and he were a miser who had never known money. He wrote to John in smaller letters now because he had more to say. He described a club described in a song, a wooden blade with shards of glass glued along grooves cut into both sides. The singer had called it wolf teeth, a name men always give tools, some animal the tool hopes to be. He wrote that obsidian arrowheads shiver, that they can be made thicker at the base to keep the shivering to the tip. He drew little figures in ink with fat lines so the men at the wall who carved and made things could copy the angles. He wrote that obsidian eats iron's pride, that where white walkers touch, iron dies, and that black glass does not care. John took the letter into Donal Noy's forge and laid it flat on the table. "Make these," he said. "They will break," Noy said, "the way the truth speaks." "Make twice as many," John said, "the way duty speaks back." They made arrowheads and spear tips and small knives better used as charms. They made clubs with black edges duly named, though no one said the name aloud. Hay taught the boys to wrap hands in leather so black glass would not bite their own pulses open. They taught oil and tinder to sleep together in a man's pouch without burning him and to wake quickly when woken. They made fire manageable not because it is truly manageable but because men can be taught to pretend it is, and the pretense works until it doesn't. The first ranging equipped with Sam's obsidian left before dawn one day so cold the horses' stones hung like lumps of iron. John watched them go and then did the thing he did when they left. He went and looked at the cells of those who would not return. He spoke to them as if they were men in bed late. The letter that came back a month later did not arrive tied to the leg of a raven. It arrived in a boy, raw cheeks and bell clanging on his belt. He carried himself like a body had a note he needed to deliver and was not sure he would have a body after the note was delivered. He had been with Dywin, John's ranger, old and cheerful and scabbed with stories. The old man had put his hand on the boy's head and told him he now had a job to do that would keep Dywin from being angry when he died. The boy had listened with his whole face, had run with the letter as if the letter were a lover. John broke the wax with a thumb that wanted not to. He read in Dywin's slow hand, "The woods were blue. I do not know how to write that, but they were. The snow was like noise. We saw them before they saw us. We had the glass. We killed one. The arrow did not like to go into it, but it did. The other two went thin and wore the light wrong and went away. We burned everything and it screamed, and that is a sound I do not like to have heard. One of ours, Jake's, did not rise. We cut off his head and burned him. His mother can have a plank of the tree we burned him with." John read it twice. He went to the forge and told Donal Noy they needed more. Then he went to the rookery and wrote to Sam in a hand that betrayed a tremor he did not name. "You killed one," he wrote. "He meant you because the way it works is that each man in a chain of work does the killing." South, Sam had found the book he had not known he was looking for. It was Septon Barth and had been copied badly by a man with a cramped hand and a poor patience for dragons. It was not the things about dragons that mattered. It was the way Barth thought about old things, the way a farmer thinks about winter, as something that comes whether you approve of it or not, and for which you best be ready with cellar and plan. Barth had seen obsidian mentioned in a Valyrian account of a people from east of Ashai who set black glass in wood and used it on things that were not men. The Valyrian scribe had been contemptuous in the way that made contempt valuable. He had described the glue. He had described it badly, but he had described it. Sam did not set to cooking glue like a hedge witch. He did not need to. He had a glue that did not melt in cold ready to hand. He had the viscous, stubborn black pitch used to seal ship's seams. He had a dockmaster's son who owed all eras a favor and who liked the idea of making something. He wrote to John describing the way the obsidian should sit in grooves and not be hammered in, because hammered obsidian turns back into the sand it once pretended never to have been. He wrote of the angle and how the blade must present itself to a target if it wanted not to bury its glass in the target uselessly. He wrote as if the writing could make him stand beside John and put his hands over John's hands. Marwyn watched this with a contentment he hid by snarling at anyone who came to ask him for anything. "You will need more black glass," he said one morning as if he were scolding the weather for its habits. "The fist of the first men," Sam said. "We found some there. We cannot climb a wall and go 100 leagues north for more every week." "Dragonstone," Marwyn said. Sam scowled because he did not scowl well. "That is not our island." "Whose island is any island?" Marwyn said. "Whose tower is any tower? If a man's house has a fire and yours is cold, you do not ask to borrow flame. You go and you steal it and then you argue later." He rubbed a knuckle over his jaw. "Write to White Harbor. Ask them how expensive Skago's obsidian is this winter." Sam had not known that Skago's, all mad and half a rumor, had more than goat's legends, but of course it did. He wrote to White Harbor in a tone that made him sound like a man who understands the value of things, and received a reply that made him feel a child again. It was courteous, but it reminded him that the North remembers to count the cost of everything. They could bring black glass by small boats through weather that punished small boats. They could do it if the watch would promise to keep the gift clear enough of raiders that an ox might keep its tail. It was a cruel bargain because the watch could promise nothing. The watch promised anyway. The first crates came in spring fog, labeled as mortarstone because there were men who believed that a crate called mortarstone was less worth stealing than one called black glass. John opened one himself. The obsidian within was raw and pretty and cruel. It had the glitter of mischief. He touched one rough edge, careful and firm, and felt as if he had put his hand to the back of a sleeping cat and it had woken with a grace he could respect. The men put the stone into the hands of women who were not supposed to be there but were, and children who would be women soon, and men who understood that a wall is only as strong as the hands that repair it. They learned, all of them, to cut and to set and to glue. South, Oldtown scowled and swelled and seethed as the news from both ends of the world made a stew of politics. Euron Greyjoy had taken an island as if he had simply pointed and it had come to heel. The Hightower's beacon burned as brightly as it always had, but men on the streets walked with their Eads turning more often, like prey that knows it has been sighted. The Citadel muttered about the indecencies of pirates and the indecencies of kings and the greater indecencies of those who pretended to be neither, then went back to cataloging bottles. Sam went to the docks with all eras and watched crews unload pine and vinegar and outlawed perfumes. He'd learned to count and to watch for patterns as if the world itself were a book and he needed to catch the trick that made its pages turn. The boats from Skago's came green with weed on their planks and a stink of kelp and fish that had met their gods. The men on them had eyes like knives left out in rain. They would not say the word obsidian, but they held it as if it had a word older than them anyway, a word not for speaking. How long before some lord takes notice? All eras asked as they hauled another crate toward the quay where an honest porter would put an honest question to the wrong man. "Too late," Sam said, watching the lighthouse's white day flames smear the fog. "They notice when the thing becomes a word they can say in council. We are a word in the throat now. They will cough when a thing else chokes them." All eras tilted her head at him the way she did when he said some inelegant truth. "You are getting better at talking like them," she said. "Beware. You will wake one day and find you are wearing a mask." "I wear many," Sam said. "The trick is to keep them from growing together." He went back to the Citadel and made trouble in quiet ways. He petitioned for a class for those who served at keeps along the Mander's length, factors who wrote accounts for White Harbor and Oldtown alike. He offered to teach them ciphering peculiar to ravens, so messages could cross half a country and not be used wrong by men who did not know how to use them right. He built a little code that used colors and lengths of shutter openings in the Hightower's light. At first the Hightower did not like that. Then they did that thing which great houses do when a thing becomes useful. They decided it had been their idea all along. He wrote to White Harbor and to House Manderly's scribe and to Lord Commander Mormont, who gave the letter to John because John was the one who would be impolite enough to move on it. They built smaller beacons on the coast and up near Deepwood Motte, and taught men with calloused hands and low reputations the algebra of light. It is remarkable how quickly a man who has been told he is stupid learns to count when the numbers mean someone will not die. Jakin Hagar, though he was not that name then, came and took Pate's heart with a coin easier than that. He did it on a night warm enough that Sam could walk without a cloak and not think someone would call him a spendthrift. He did it with such skill that only people like All Eras and Sam, who had learned to watch as if they were writing down what they saw, knew anything had happened at all. In the morning, the wrongness lay on the Citadel like a light ash. Sam could not pick it out. He felt like a man who wakes with the last frame of a nightmare in his head. The sense of having forgotten to say a word that would have worked as a spell. Pate's place at the porter's desk was taken by a boy with his old mannerisms and new, sleek hair. The alchemist secured a key and walked in places where he should not have walked, wearing someone else's slouch. Sam watched him out of the corner of his eye and thought of the glass candle and decided that there are many lights one cannot trust. The night the shields burned, Oldtown smelled like singed hair for days. Euron Greyjoy sent men the way a man sends a spoon into a stew pot, intent on what he wanted and contemptuous of the broth. Sam stood at the top of the high tower with a handful of men who thought the light was a job and learned it had suddenly become a war. He sent the shutters quick as rain, a 1 for danger, then a halt, then a 3 to say shields, then a color set for green to mean ships, and then blue for reavers, and then a black that meant nothing because black is the absence of light, and sometimes a man must inform people of that too. All Eras came up late, her hair wind-snapped, her bow unstrung because she no longer pretended an arrow mattered at that distance. Sloops from old Volantis, she said, because she scraped gossip from taverns like marrow from bones. Ironborn wearing squid on their chests as if that is bravery. The high tower will call banners, but banners do nothing against a tide. Tides do nothing against a light, Sam said under his breath, and set his code again and again until his palms were blistered and the light's gleam felt branded into his skull. On the 4th night, the shutters replied from an inland beacon in a code he had not invented. It was 3 longs and a pause, 3 longs and a pause. The unslick hairs on his arms stood up. The code meant help is coming if you can hold. It had the tenor of the Manderley scribe's temper. Practical, and not promising more than anyone could deliver. They held. The high tower did its job the way an old warhorse does. Badly at anything it had not been trained for, perfectly at everything else. The raiders learned that a harbor with booms and chains is a mouth with teeth. Men died. Sam did not see any of them die. He saw lights. He sent the word out and watched it come back and understood that sometimes knowing was the only way to survive not knowing. In the north, the weather obliged the watch by worsening. The more it hurt, the more it prepared the men who would die when it hurt most. John used the months to teach. He took boys who thought knives were for showing off and taught them to cut rope in high wind, blind and with cold fingers, and praised them when they did it properly. He took men who thought reading was for those who lost fights and let them see how a list could put more food in their bellies than swagger ever would. He sketched out a map of the gift, and marked the homesteads where a knock at the door meant a pan of oatcakes and where it meant a cudgel. He sent rangers not outward into the haunted forest but inward along the truth of their territory. He tightened the noose on lawlessness because lawless men love hungry winters. He slept too little and he went to the top of the wall too often to see if the world had changed subtle and decisive in a way he had not yet counted. Sometimes, when all the noise in his head would not be outshouted by work, he went to the little storage room he had found and barred the door and said Sam's name softly into candlelight. And sometimes the light said his name back. Sam learned not to love the wrong maesters and not to despise the right ones. He learned to argue with Ibros about how many water jars a man should carry when he goes where water is frozen harder than bone. He won the argument by presenting a list of dead men who had carried too few. Maester Ibros hated lists like that because they always made you add names. He added 3 and called Sam impertinent and had a book sent north with a hand-lettered table of conversions. How much weight a man can carry in snow and still move as if he wants to go somewhere. Sam learned to speak in the councils where the old men's lips were puce and the young men's eyes were mean with envy. He learned to go quiet when it would make a man strain to hear him and therefore believe him. He learned the one trick of politics worth knowing. Decide which men need the truth and give them more of it than they asked for but less than they could choke on. He was not a brilliant man. He was a patient man taught by fear to be thorough. It made him dangerous in a way he never felt. On a morning that smelled of rain but delivered none, all eras brought him a bundle wrapped in rough cloth. "For your John," she said. Sam unwrapped it carefully and then with more speed as the shape under the cloth revealed itself. It was a club, heavier than he thought despite its modest size, with 2 grooves cut along its sides and obsidian shards set along them like teeth. The pitch had been pressed and smoothed with practiced hands. No edges stuck out where they shouldn't. The balance was good. Alira smiled because she liked to look at things that worked in the hand. "Your wolf teeth," she said. "Your dreams in wood." "They were not my dreams," Sam said. Emotional in the way a man is when a friend insists he take credit, and he cannot because taking it would be a theft of something older. "They belonged to someone who thought of the world as if it could be changed." "You thought that," Alira said. "Be kind to yourself. A man can be a thief if he steals a wish from an ancestor and gives it flesh." Sam sent it north with a letter that tried not to tell John how to use it and failed because Sam did not know how to make a thing and not care. The letter went with a raven that had learned to peck his fingers affectionately. He watched it go and felt like a silly father on a quay. John held the club while the rangers shivered around him on the tower's wind terrace. He tested it because there was no other way to test a thing meant to bite ghosts. The black glass looked like a sneer at sunlight. He thought of all the things that had been done by men with nothing and how those things were sometimes as good as what kings made. "Who wants to tell a story good enough to test a monster?" he asked the silent circle. Gren took the club, meaty hands respectful. "I'll keep my guts inside while I do it," he said. John put his hand to Gren's shoulder a moment and then stepped back because men must stand away from each other to see if they stand at all. The whites came again, in sullen trickles at first and then in a slow, deliberate surge. Winter does not always announce itself by screaming. Sometimes it arrives by negotiating with the temperature and winning. The men on the wall learned to listen for the silence that comes when the birds decide the air belongs to something else. John tightened his gloves. They fought on the ground because the wall is for seeing, not for fighting. The snow gave and gave again under boot. Gren used Sam's club like a man learning a tune he had known as a boy. He took out knees and hands and elbows because those are the places a body learns it is no longer a body. The obsidian cut. It broke. It cut again. When the others themselves came, thin and lit oddly, expressionless as lutes, John had his own sword in hand and the club in the other and knew he could not use both and hated himself for the luxury of choice. He threw the club to Gren, and Gren did what men do when given a tool in crisis. He found out how to swing it by swinging it wrong and then less wrong and then well enough to kill. The first other broke. The sound it made was the sound of water freezing too fast to remain water. John found that he could exhale and drew in air that stank of iron as if blood had gotten into the wind somehow. He thought of Sam at a tower window staring at a candle that did and did not burn, and he said thank you aloud as if he were a man in a chapel. None of the men answered. They weren't men when a battle is going on, they were battle-moving things, and afterward they were tired and nothing with a name. The great ranging went out with more glass and more cleverness and came back with fewer dead than it might have, which is never a comfort when you discover death is not measured in percentages but in the names of men you have shared bread with. Lord Commander Mormont listened to John's account and nodded and did not smile because there is a kind of leader who knows his men need him to be a father, and there is another who knows they need him to be the uncle who steals with them as well as for them. Mormont was neither. He was a man of the old world's sternness, who knew that the next world would not respect it. "Write to your maester," he told John. "Tell him we will need a thou. Sand clubs and 100,000 arrowheads and a better chance than we have." "I already wrote," John said, and Mormont made a small noise that was all exasperation and all pride. "Good. Then write again." Sam wrote and wrote. He sent new patterns and new ways of binding glue so it would not crack in cold. He sent a list of plants in the gift whose oils make fire obey more quickly. He did not send instructions for mixing wildfire because men who mix wildfire discover how many words in the human mouth can be used to say regret. He wrote to White Harbor with a roomful of men all trying to put more black glass in boats than any boat had a right to hold. He learned to look at a crate and hear its voice. He learned to love accountants because they are the people who teach a war how not to starve. The glass candle burned more easily now. Sam did not need Marwen's ugly drop of blood to coax it to life. He could light it with his voice. He did not know if that was his doing or the world's. He dared a thing one night and called not for John but for Maester Eamon. The candle answered and showed an old man's face turned to the wall's wind and offered a listening so pure Sam wept. "I am sorry," he told Eamon. "I am sorry that you are where duty and desire part each other's hair." "I am where I am," Eamon said calmly, as if that were the only sacred thing. "And you are where you will do real things." He paused. "Find me a song that will not end. I have liked those." Sam sent him a long letter with an old lyric in it, translated as plainly as he could manage from a first men tongue that was more grunt than grammar. It was about a man who built a fire that remained even when he left the world. He kept the letter uncharacteristically brief because he feared he would say something tender and lose Eamon that way. Oldtown learned to walk the narrow paths between contagions. Rumors about dragons arrived the way rumors about saints do, with too much color in them to be true and a thing underneath all paint that makes a man choose between laughter and awe. Marwen announced that he would be going to the east on a ship named the Cinnamon Wind, which made every maester who disliked him gleeful in the meanest ways. He said to Sam at parting, "You will be one of the ones who teach the next age to chew. Keep your teeth." "I don't have the bite for it," Sam said, but he was pleased and pretended not to be, and Marwen laughed and went away to die or to burn or to eat stew, who could tell. In the candlelight that night, the black glass's surface stretched like a skin and showed him John again. Hair frosted rarely with snow that had not yet decided whether to commit to falling. John's face had changed in tiny ways, the way stone does when wind makes a lover of it. He was more himself. Sam felt the courage that comes when you watch someone become their most dangerous form and know you are allowed to keep knowing them. "John," he said, and John answered. And an hour later Sam had a list of tools the wall needed and a list of names of men who might be persuaded to help. The word persuade made both of them tired. Sam took that tired to Lady Marjorie's cousin's husband, who owed the Citadel a favor saved from a fire long ago. And he did the particular alchemy of turning obligations into timber that showed up at Eastwatch and Sawyer's, who knew to keep their fingers. He wrote until his own hands shook and soaked them in water steeped with mint because all eras insisted that the body is the one library that throws you out if you do not treat its keeper decently. Stacking obsidian in crates at the high tower's base one afternoon, he cut himself again. The glass bit beneath his thumbnail and made the world small for a moment. Everything narrowed to a red bead swelling at the edge of what he understood. He cursed and sucked at the cut and thought, dark and stupidly brave. Let it drink. Let it have that drop again. Later that night the candle flared without him speaking, and for a moment he understood that some bonds are made stupidly and are stronger for it. He did not tell anyone this. He learned that in a world like theirs, the thing a man should tell is the thing that will change a day into a different one, not the thing that will make men look at him with superstition hardened into contempt. He learned to keep certain devotions quiet. The watchmen on the Oldtown walls called that winter the fog year. The fog came off the whispering sound and sat with the town like a relative that drank too much and spoke too loud. It softened edges and sharpened questions. Euron Greyjoy sent raiders again. They burned orchards this time. They took 3 girls and a boy and 2 pigs to prove they could still artfully be monstrous. The high tower's beacon burned and the little inland lights answered. Men who could not read a written word learned to read a shutter in a high place. That is the other kind of literacy. This here now. Sam would go to the top and breathe the cold and act like a master of signals and then go down and scrub his hands and make notes about how long it took for a message to travel in clear weather versus pea soup fog and work the difference into the code. If he had been another kind of man, he might have grown proud. He was this kind. He grew careful instead, which looks like caution but is less fearful. Gilly arrived in a ship packed with other strays in a spring that had the poor manners from the north. She had the child with her, and if the child was not the one Sam had promised to deliver, he learned quickly to love that confusion into sense. He found them a narrow room near the olive trees where women hung laundry. Gilly looked at him as if she were a scarecrow that had been asked to attend court. "Is this where men live?" she asked. "Some do," he said. "Others live half in their heads and half in their offices. That means they live nowhere and everywhere and are very hard to feed." She took that and then nodded and then didn't nod, expression moving through choices like clouds. She kept the boy in her lap and he slept with his mouth open, and Sam, who had read too much about how children die, felt his body go to pieces with a cautious joy. That night, before the candle, he told John that Gilly had come and the boy had laughed in his sleep. John did not say anything for a long while, and the silence was the sort that tells a man that his friend is more alive for the information and not less. The year turned itself and then turned itself again, as if stubbornness could make it avoid being called a year at all. Winter deepened and then flirted with retreat and then had the decency to come back and kill crops for real. North of the wall, John stood at a council table and felt the weight of choices sing in his bones. South, Sam stood at an open window because he would not visit a candle at every tremor in his heart. He began to live without constant lettered reassurances the way a child lives without a toy. He finally breaks and learns that the day continues anyway. On a night so clear that the stars made everyone in Oldtown a little stupid with awe, the glass candle showed Sam an image he had not asked for. A woman with hair like snow fallen out of season stood with a dragon behind her. It was not the dragon that took Sam's breath. It was the way the woman looked like a decision. He had read of such women. He had read of the things men did when they believed such women meant them harm or salvation. He had learned to hate the men more than the women, which is what happens when you read long enough. He breathed the image's air, which was not his own air, and then let the candle go dark by closing his eyes. He wrote to John the next day. The letter was short. "The world is getting larger," he wrote. "Make our world smaller by deciding what it includes." John received that and did not sleep and went out in the night and hit posts with a wooden sword until his shoulders gave him a headache. He was a creature of limits. The thought of largeness reminded him he was a man and not a god. He trained because training is the way men make meaning out of limitations. When the long night announced itself properly, it did it by putting very old footprints in very new snow. Men followed them and found ice where men should be. They met the enemy with wolves' teeth and with fire they had learned to bring with them, and with a kind of discipline no army bothers to teach refugees. They failed and failed better and failed toward survival. Sam's clubs bit and shattered and bit again. His glue did not crack. His small cunning with pitch saved a cart and therefore saved the hands that pulled it. The code in the high tower saved a village that otherwise would have been ash in morning light. None of these were of a kind to win ballads, which is the kindness of ballads. They made children reach 10, which is a more interesting feat. In Oldtown, Sam dreamed he had made a wall of words across the Mander and that the Ironborn had crashed against it and broken. He woke with the taste of salt on his lips and realized he had been crying into his mouth while he slept. He dressed and went out into the fog and found all eras shooting arrows again. She was painting, too. Tar on boards, marking codes and teaching boys bored with hauling to move their hands in patterns that would carry an army's dinner to the wrong island if done poorly. She smiled at him and he smiled back, and he thought, if we live, we will say we did it with swords and with dragons. We did it with arrows that knew where to land and with boys who learned worth by doing tasks men do not sing in inns. The candle took him to the wall one last time before the tale twisted into something no one can tell and remain the person who began the telling. He found John on a night when the moon had forgotten to do the polite thing and light their plans. John was tired the way the sea is tired, ceaseless and indifferent, and sometimes passionate enough to make something new by mistake. "South is ready," Sam said, "or as ready as it can be when men want other things. You will have Skago's obsidian until the boats stop. You will have archers who understand angles. You will have a code that tells men 2 valleys over that they should run toward you and not away." "And what will you have?" John asked. He sounded like a man who does not consider his own soul worth moving to safety, which is not noble so much as dangerous. "I will have a candle," Sam said, "and the possibility of something larger than the gates I am allowed to open. I will have Gilly and a foolish boy who is worth any king." John's mouth twisted briefly into the shape it made for humor. He nodded. Silence sat with them a while, companionable. "We will not be heroes," he said, not quite a question. "Of course not," Sam answered. "We will be necessary." When the dawn came like a liar, too pink, too gentle, too far a promise, the men of the Night's Watch rose. They took up black clubs that had teeth and arrows that had been made quickly but not stupidly, and torches that knew their purpose. They moved like a single creature, all elbows and boots and restraint. They were hungry and angry and cold and perfectly themselves. Far to the south, Oldtown's light flickered in its codes, halting and then sure, a second language learned too late and still learned. The harbor churned with boats bearing no flags worth the name but full of things that men would put to uses the world had not taught their fathers. Men at tables scratched figures until their wrists cramped, finding food days inward with numbers they could not taste. Women stood aside in doorways and made the small decisions that mean life when men like to pretend that life is not made of small decisions. Sam stood in a narrow corridor with a candle that was not fire but nonetheless had heat and watched the cold on the other end of it. He spoke into the glass and the glass SP. Oak back and between them the world ran its rope, taut and singing. Beyond the wall a thing older than any language strode soundless across snow. It looked like a man's idea of elegance. John raised his sword and there was no music, because the only music that matters is the kind that measure goes under and stubbornness goes over. The club in Gren's hand met the other with a sound like a shiver made audible. The arrowheads in the Fletcher's bags found their flights to precise places where shadows were thin. Flame went up where it should and did not where it should not. The men did not say words. They did the work. When it was done enough to stop, John leaned against the wall and remembered what lungs are for. He laughed once because life always does that after. He said, into a darkness that still held the shape of Sam's listening, "We will need more." "South," Sam answered without hesitation, because hesitation is a luxury reserved for its opposite. "I will send it," he said. He had a list already in his head. He went out of the room and found Gilly singing something that had no tune and made the boy grin in his sleep. He stood very still and listened until her voice had taught his heart a small trick, to beat more softly while the child slept. He wrote the lists, then wrote the letters. He walked to the high tower and felt it like a tree in winter, rooted, stripped, and ready to tear up the soil with its stubbornness if forced. He spoke to the men at the light. He scolded one. He thanked another. He reminded the third that the shutters had to be oiled or the code would stick in a word that would change meaning on him. He went down again and into the city where the weather of men is always the same and always surprising. He ate a heel of bread because hunger is as good a counsel as any god in times like his. Nights later, when the fog lifted and stars again made fools of scholars by being exactly where they had always been and still amazing, Sam went to the glass candle one more time. He did not speak. He put his thumb on the stone where the dried remnant of his earlier cut, the first one, had left a mark he could not see but felt. The candle brightened. The wall rose in black and white. John was there, a silhouette on a battlement. His hair a suggestion of movement the wind was making on him. "Sam," he said before Sam spoke, and if that was magic, it was uninteresting. Men call 1,000 things magic that are simply the consequences of knowing where to look. "They are coming again." Sam nodded, though no one would see it. He breathed in and out. He said, without any poetry at all because the moment did not require it, "You know what to do." John smiled a small, rare smile that only came to men who had been taught that the world will not give them the thing they want. "Ido." He did, and Sam did too. And Oldtown did not so much choose as find itself chosen by the demands of a map that had suddenly grown teeth and a sky that had decided to mean things again. The lights shuddered and opened. The ravens took to the air and solved distances. The clubs cut. The glue held. The snow threw back light as if generosity were a trick the world knew how to play once more. There are wars made by swords and wars made by cleverness. There are men who go down to any kind of sea in any kind of ships and bring back the possibility of different mistakes. There are scholars who learn to love being wrong because every mistake throws its little torchlight on the curve of something truer. There are winters, there are long nights, there are candles, and the people who dare to hold them. Sam held one, awkwardly sometimes and always more carefully after it bit him. He learned the art of handing a flame to another man without burning him or letting it go out. John learned to be handed such things and not pretend they were swords. Oldtown learned how to be more than a place you go when your life is done teaching you how to live. The wall learned it was no bare barrier but a mouth that could speak if it wanted. And farther east, a woman with hair like the future made choices and ignored them when they tried to turn into myths too quickly. But that is another tale, and this one had all the fire it could stand. A year later, after too many names had been written and crossed out in the Citadel's new lists of the dead, and after too many boys had come to men's work and men had come to ruin and the light codes had saved a wedding party, because that is the sort of absurd miracle war occasionally shares to keep men from becoming monsters entirely, Sam took the club all eras had given him down from the peg where he sometimes hung it to feel less like a man made of paper and more like a thing that could cut. He tested the teeth with a careful finger. He thought, with a calm that still frightened him when he caught it in the act, of making more and making different and teaching another frightened boy to count his failures like stones, not to burden himself, but to feel the weight of what builds walls and bridges both. He put the club back. He lit the candle. He said nothing for a while, because silence is also a word and had lately learned to carry the weight of many. Then, quietly and as if talking to himself, he said a prayer about obsidian that was not about glass at all. It was about men. It went break, shatter, cut, and then it went hold.